Secret Invasion is the latest entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the long-going franchise of films and television shows at this point. A lot of hours of TV. Surprisingly, though, this is one that I believe it's the first Disney Plus Marvel show to come out this year. I'm having a hard time thinking back on this year because I know Guardians came out and Ant-Man. I don't think there's been a Marvel TV show from them this year. Secret Invasion is the first. I think that came after kind of like a mandate or just like a growing interest in slowing down their output because they started to recognize some of the critiques online, like, hey, there's a lot of shit out there. There's a lot of stuff you expect casual audiences to go into movies and just expect them to know. And maybe, maybe that's not the best way to go about it. So this might be like the end of that era of the MCU, What does the future have in store for it after this? I don't know. I think a lot of it does have to do with the critical consensus on this one, though. Let's dive right on in. What's the show about? You remember Captain Marvel? Do you remember the Skrulls? Basically, we're picking up on that storyline years after the fact because Marvel took place in the 90s. Nick Fury and Captain Marvel said, we're going to find you a new home. In fact, the ending is Captain Marvel pushing that ship off to take the Skrulls that were on Earth to a new place to call their home. And she never did. So they came back to Earth, I guess, and Sam Jackson's like, look, we'll find you a new place, but for now, let me use you for agent stuff, secret agent stuff. Eventually we'll get you a new home, though. And he didn't. Do you know how many years it's been since the 90s? And especially in the MCU timeline, since, Infinity War and Endgame gap is 5 years as well. So yeah, they've been there for a long time with like the empty promise of maybe eventually we'll find you a new home, but let's keep serving this guy. So a Skrull named Gravik, played by Kingsley Ben-Adir, decides, you know what, I'm done with that. I've organized a faction of Skrulls and we're going to rebel not just against Fury, but just the planet. We're going to take over because if we can't find a new home, this one will do. So going into this show, I really wanted to like this. I was really excited to see something that was a little bit more grounded and gritty in a spy way, bringing us back to the similar vein of what the Russo brothers brought us with the Winter Soldier, but this time less heroes, you know what I mean? Like there's no Captain America or Winter Soldier at this point. It's just a bunch of the spy characters that we've seen on the sidelines. They have to team up and, discover the root of this Skrull problem, and they're teamed up with Ben Mendelsohn, of course, and Emilia Clarke's a new addition as well, but for the most part they are completely outmatched, and that excited me to some degree because that promised something that was more thrilling, a little bit more personal as well, because you're dealing with characters that don't rely on powers, just something really interesting and something to really sink your teeth into. And Sam Jackson, he's been in this franchise longer than Robert Downey Jr. at this point. They started at the same time, but Tony's dead. So Sam Jackson has been around this whole time, and he's always been a side character. Even when he's had more to do, like in Captain Marvel or even the Winter Soldier, it's always been a supporting role. So to have him be at the forefront, that could be something interesting. And for someone like Sam Jackson, he really does deserve that. He's a legend, a legendary actor, and he deserves the best. This show is not the best. In fact, it's probably my least favorite thing that they've ever put out, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, including everything, every TV show, every movie. This is the worst thing that they've put out, I think. It's unbelievably bad in some ways, like unbelievably bad for like an MCU project, like it's bad in ways that I didn't really think they would ever stoop so low for, but they did. It's not even like a thing of like, oh, are they going into like Sony Marvel territory or like DC where they fumbled, they doing that. It's not even really comparable with the fumbles on those ends. It's just let's talk about it. Let's just dive right on in. I think the main thing that some people have brought up is that doing a Secret Invasion storyline would be so cool if you had more superhero characters, because the whole thing about the Skrulls in the comics, and I think they even touch on it in the movies as well. Maybe I don't remember Captain Marvel all that much as far as like what the Skrulls could do. But they can assume their identity. But if it's a superhuman or an Iron Man or Captain America, whatever, they can take their powers as well. Like not only can I impersonate your image and your voice, but I can impersonate your powers. And that's cool, and it creates a can of worms for an Avengers kind of storyline. Like, okay, one of us is a Skrull, who? You know what I mean? Like, who actually, and also how do we expose them and defeat them without getting beat up too badly by them because they can fight us? You know what I mean? It seems like the Skrull invasion stuff seems like a perfect kind of plot for an Avengers movie, and having it just be some of the spy characters can seem a little lame in comparison. So I've already seen, complaints about that before the show even came out. But I think now that we've wrapped up the show, the only big Skrull reveal that was like supposed to be like game-changing, shocking, it wasn't really, just because you can look at the cast and just go like, all right, well, if I was a guessing man, spoilers. I'm just going to spoil it because it's been out a while, and if you haven't seen it, you've probably seen it blasted on Twitter. Yeah, Don Cheadle's Rhodey, the War Machine, is a Skrull. He doesn't put on War Machine armor at any point. He doesn't get into a fight with anybody as a Skrull. He's a part of the president, Dermot Mulroney's team, so he's infiltrated government in that way, so he's doing government stuff. But that reveal was kind of like, yeah, I think everybody predicted that one. It wasn't really that much of a shock. And it's also like, it's just such a lame kind of pick. Like, the reason why the Secret Invasion comics work for so many people is that it comes after a lot of other storylines, and then, you have those other heroes as well, these other characters, these histories, and it's dramatically altered. Or things can be explained by the reveal of like, oh, this character has actually been a Skrull for a while. I don't know how many people have watched the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes cartoon series, but they have a Secret Invasion-esque kind of subplot in a couple of the episodes. I don't know which season, if it was first or second. It was probably the second one. Doesn't matter. Captain America gets replaced by a Skrull for a couple different episodes, and you flash up to him like being held hostage on the ship, and then you also recognize this Skrull is pretending to be Captain America for so many of these other episodes, and nobody notices, and it's actually pretty cool, and that's more of like, that's a shocking thing to just be invested from the start, like, and like, I know who just got replaced, but nobody else does. What does that mean? What are they trying to do? There's ways that you can go about this that's interesting. You can even do like a Secret Invasion show like this, but have it build into something bigger, like an Avengers, and they didn't really. It seems like it's all, I think the director of the whole thing was like, not Kevin Feige, but the director of the series was like, it's season 1, so maybe we can come back for more. But it seems pretty resolved at the end. They really rush through the ending of this to the point where it's like, it seems like they want to be done with any potential Skrull swapping stuff at this point. But going back to my main point as far as like, yeah, the only Skrull reveal isn't that shocking, but it's also, it's kind of lame in a different sense, because picking like a very obvious choice, okay, that's one thing, but having it be Rhodes, it's another thing, because he is already a character who is, it's not that he's a bad character, it's just he's always been a supporting player. So people have always wanted more from Rhodey. We're about to get Armor Wars, where he's the lead in that. And people have always wanted more of him, because the little bits of character and some of the relationships he has with the other Avengers, especially Tony, that's always been special and interesting. So the way that they are implying it, without saying it, because I'm sure it's subject to change, but the way they're implying it is he's in his hospital gown when he gets found from Civil War. When they breaks his legs, he gets paralyzed. So he's in that same hospital gown. So they seem to be implying, without saying, that ever since Civil War he's been a Skrull, but that takes away so much of his involvement in Infinity War and Endgame. It's kind of like, it's not necessarily we don't want to see these big shocking reveals and, changes to what we've seen before, but it's very obviously something that was just done after the fact. It's not something they really planned. It's something that they're like, well, in retrospect, yeah, that could be a point where he was a Skrull. Why don't we just do it like that? It doesn't feel like storytelling. Do you know what I mean? It just feels like we picked the most obvious thing to do the thing, and we're gonna move on. But the thing is, because they didn't officially say, yeah, he's been held hostage since Civil War, it's subject to change. So they could go into Armor, I don't know how far into production they are with Armor Wars, they could go in and change that and be like, he got taken after Endgame, right before Falcon and the Winter Soldier, his appearance in that. And if I'm being honest, that might make a little bit more sense, because you're telling me, like, ever since Civil War, which was 2016, by the way, and I'm assuming the timeline in this, the year's like 2025 or something like that. I'm not sure exactly the year, but like, you're gonna tell me this whole time he's been a Skrull and he just hasn't done anything until like right now to really advance like any kind of Skrull plot for Gravik or anything like that. Like, what's the point, you know? What's the point of keeping the real Rhodey alive in the first place? But also, what's the point of even doing that if you're not going to do anything? Also, someone pointed this out on Twitter, and I haven't, you know, been able to forget about it, is that when they went to find Thanos in Endgame, the beginning of the movie, there's a planet right there that, you know, is completely abandoned except for him, and they killed him, you know? So Rhodey seeing that, Rhodey going on that mission, and if he is a Skrull, why wouldn't he just be like, oh, I found the planet, here it is. And I only bring that up because there's this whole thing of like, look, we're not just tricking the Skrulls into doing labor for Nick Fury, secret agent labor for Nick Fury, you know. We tried finding a home. We couldn't find anything. Nothing? Captain Marvel blasted off at the end with them with the sole purpose of, I'm gonna find you guys a home. And when she reappears in Endgame, there's this implication like, yeah, she did that, and then she also started helping other people in the universe. You're telling me like she's been helping all these other people in the universe, but the Skrulls, she was like, fuck off, and like took them back to Earth or some shit? Like, what do you mean you didn't find anything? Nothing? No planets? Not any other planet that was like completely abandoned, that was perfectly fine. The universe is vast. Are you kidding? And if you're trying to like also, you know, work in the logic of like, well, Captain Marvel isn't as active in Endgame because there are a lot of other planets out there, implying that she travels far ass distances. She still couldn't find anything? Like, how far does the space go for you, dude? What? There's some really flimsy writing, and if I can go back to the ending of this really quick, you know, they try to act like they have a plot going because there's a lot of scenes where characters, especially Sam Jackson, and bless his soul, but there's a lot of scenes where he just sits down at the first opportunity and is like, all right, let's talk about some plot stuff, you know, and they try their best to make it interesting, but there's too much of that repetition. And then at the very end, after like, it feels like it's dragging on, this 6-episode, an hour, mostly like 30 to 40 minute kind of event series, and it feels like it's dragging on, and then it gets to the end and it's like, oh, a lot of people have found out real identities of the Skrulls who they've swapped, so they've just like done public executions. Even when they're wrong, they're just publicly executing real people. But we don't need to worry about that too much right now. You know, and it just feels like such an easy, just clean slate, fuck this, end the show, get Nick Fury back into space for the Marvels. And he's doing vague space stuff, and it's like, wow, like they're fumbling the bag in so many different areas narratively. And it doesn't help also that when it comes to like the other aspects that make a good product, action sequences or good acting or, you know, great dialogue, stuff like that, not that this show doesn't have redeeming qualities, it's just there are too many moments where production-wise it seems very poor. You've all seen the final fight already. I'm sure you've seen the final fight with the horrible CGI, Drax's arm being on Emilia Clarke and the Mantis antennas coming out and the Hulk fist. It's like, it all looks like visual gobbledygook, you know? It does not look good at all. And those poor VFX artists, goddamn, I am so sorry. But I don't even think, even if you gave them all the time in the world, there's nothing that can fix that fight, because also it creates these weird implications once Emilia Clarke has every single Avengers power, even the ones that seem like unnecessary. Like, oh, you have the Hulk strength and you also have Captain America's strength, but is the Hulk stronger than Cap? Probably. Like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing just throwing names out there? Like, hey, you know who this is. You know who that is. She has all the powers. All of them. And then they just kind of leave her, like she teams up with Olivia Colman in the last 5 minutes for vague reasons that they don't go into. And speaking of Olivia Colman, she's lovely. She's a bright spot in this acting-wise, because you have all these other people that are so serious and committed. And, you know, she's serious too, but she's also like, I'm gonna chop your finger off now to see if you're a Skrull. Let's do it. And she's like, you know, smiling and has like this positive little voice. It's like, that's fucking wild. And I love her. She's crazy. I love her. But her character, I still don't even really fully grasp what it is she does. You know, I understand she knows Nick Fury. She's got a past with Nick Fury, maybe a bit. To what extent? How far does it go? How seedy is she actually? You know, what is she? You know what I mean? And we don't... what is she gonna do with Emilia Clarke? What is the plan? And what are you gonna do with Emilia Clarke in general, Kevin Feige? Like, she has all the powers and there's no scene where she's like, oh, it wore off and I can't do all the powers anymore, or it's hard for me to do, or something like that. She just still, as far as we all know, still has every single Avengers power. Why? What are you doing? Seriously, that's gonna fuck them later, because they're gonna have to have like one of those cheap ass scenes where it's like, oh, I'm assuming like maybe Kang Dynasty or something, like, oh, Emilia Clarke's the strongest one right now? Okay, well, we'll have like a easy like 2-minute opening scene where she dies immediately or something like that, you know? It's like, you guys are shooting yourself in the foot, you know what I mean? God, there is no hype at all for like what's to come if you're just looking at like this, you know, that's the threads that they leave hanging here. There's no hype for what that could lead to. I diss on the character resolution, but Emilia Clarke is a good part of this show. If I can start talking about some positives, I already mentioned Olivia Colman. Emilia Clarke is a good part of this show as well. I did enjoy Don Cheadle in this. He's always fun to see. I love Don Cheadle. If anything, I wish there was more time seeing how he was working in the US government and with the press. If I'm being honest, I would love to see like a House of Cards thing where it's just a Skrull walking around like the White House and doing, you know, post-Endgame politics stuff, you know? I would have loved to have seen that. Ben Mendelsohn is, once again, just very good as Talos. I really enjoyed that character in Captain Marvel. I was glad to see him back. Am I a little disappointed where they have left him? That I was kind of hoping, like, can they reverse that? Can they reverse Maria Hill as well? Don't. I was a little bummed, just because he is genuinely that good. And also, Kingsley Ben-Adir, he is a good actor. And for the longest time, I was watching his character, Gravik, and I was like, there is something interesting here, and I think I am, you know, riding the wavelength with him. I think I am, you know, understanding the character and the motivation, and I like the performance. But then at a certain point, they do the exact same thing that they do with that one character from Falcon and the Winter Soldier, you know, the Flag Smasher. You know, it's the same kind of setup too. You have a group of people just looking for a proper home. Things have, you know, gotten weird for them, and they have not been, you know, they have not been treated well, and they have been given false promises, and one of them has decided to stand up against that. And it seems like it's all for a just cause and something that you can be like totally on board for if you were just to hear it. Like, yeah, you know what, maybe they're right. But then they just like murder people randomly, and it's like, oh, well, and it's like, it completely kind of betrays the motivation, and it all of a sudden doesn't connect as well. It's like, well, now you're doing murders because, well, in this case for Gravik, it's because I have the Super Skrull stuff in me, and I'm getting a little mad that people think I'm going a little bit extreme. And it's like, there's interesting ways to develop that side of the villains and the dynamics with that team and everything, and instead they're just like, well, the easiest thing to do is just make him a monster and start killing his own people, you know? And it's like, that's lame, you know? And you start to lose the plot with that character. And if we're talking more about character stuff, I do need to talk about Nick Fury ultimately in this. You know, like I said earlier, if anyone deserves something that's focused on them, it's Sam Jackson, because he's always been in these movies as a supporting role, and this is his chance. And this is not the right project for not just the character of Nick Fury, but also Sam Jackson right now, because, and I'm trust me, I am not trying to age shame him at all, but you can tell, you know, you're watching the show and it's like, you are crafting the sequence to accommodate for how he can't really, he can't keep up with like a younger star, but you still want him to participate in some action beats, and it's like, it's honestly a disservice to what Sam Jackson can do, that you're just like, well, can you just do some action for us real quick, you know? And it's just so embarrassing to watch. I hate to say that, but it is embarrassing to watch. Like, there's a point where he, like, grabs, like, Don Cheadle, like, I know you're a Skrull, and he, like, shoves him against the wall. And how I'm describing it to you is, like, how it's supposed to look. Like, come here, motherfucker, you know? But instead, it's like Don Cheadle's, like, slowly walking a corner, and then Sam Jackson, like, slowly approaches him, and it's like, fuck, you're against the wall. Stay back, dude. And it's like, I can tell he's not putting anything into that, you know what I mean? And it sucks, truly, that they forced him to do that shit. There's just so many points where they're like, all right, here's a chair. Ben Mendelsohn's gonna get into a fight with this guy, but Sam Jackson, you can keep a gun on the bad guy while you sit in this chair. You know, it's a shame, you know? It's a big shame. But going back to, like, the character writing of Nick Fury, there was this thing that happened in Captain Marvel where it seemed like they explained away a lot of like the man of mystery kind of persona he puts on. Like, he's a badass, he's done shit you wouldn't know, you know, a lot of it having to do with like, how did he lose his eyeball? And they kind of, in Captain Marvel, he's just some regular guy, you know, like they don't even at that point explain like a big backstory with him. He's just an agent for an organization, you know, for S.H.I.E.L.D. in the early days. And then he loses an eye to an alien cat. But people are like, how'd you lose the eye? And he's like, oh, I could use this to my advantage. I can't tell you shit that's classified and also really fucked up, you know? So they introduced this idea that Nick Fury, okay, he's bullshitted his way along. And it's like, okay, I'm sure a lot of these people are bullshitters. I've grown to be a little bit warmer to the idea that Nick Fury, you know, isn't as like badass in his past as maybe I had thought originally. It's like, okay, I'm open to that at this point, just because it's a little bit more interesting character-wise. But in this, they also introduce like, oh, he's also just a piece of shit to the Skrulls, you know? Like, he basically used their misery of never being able to find a home somehow to exploit them, to do horrible secret agent shit like murders. Like, Gravik even tells him at one point, like, you know why I look like Kingsley Ben-Adir? Because this is the guy you had me kill for the first time. Like, this is the first man I have ever killed on your call, you know? But by the end of the series, Emilia Clarke pretends to be him at one point, which, you know, once again, not shocking, knew that was coming. And there's a moment where she kind of like says stuff like as him, but it's not him saying it, you know? And it's not even him like taking accountability or recognizing like, yeah, what I did was actually fucked up and I'm maybe like a shitty person. Oh, fuck. You know what I mean? That's not a thing that happens in this. There's a point where he's maybe like, yeah, it sucks that happened, but that's kind of the vibe he's taken, you know? And it's a huge disservice to the character, not just for the character, but also for this whole project, because the project doesn't feel like it's about anything, you know? You have Gravik's, you know, villain motivation that gets muddled because he's doing, you know, big murders to his own men, you know, and he's losing the plot. So it's like, okay, it's not really about that kind of commentary. You know, is it a father-daughter story because of Ben Mendelsohn and Emilia Clarke? Well, sort of, but that ends at one point, and then, you know, spoilers, his death doesn't really matter to Emilia Clarke's closure in this, you know. It matters at one point, but it has nothing to do with how she reflects on the stuff that has happened. Like I said, they ended abruptly. She's just partnering up with Olivia Colman, not reflecting on anything, you know. There's no statement about a father-daughter, you know, anything. Sam Jackson, you know, exploiting those fucking workers. Like I said, they treat it as just like, well, sucks that happened. This show isn't about anything. At the last second, you know, maybe you can say like, oh, it's about paranoia. Look at these guys who are taking action into their own hands and shooting Skrulls, but also not Skrulls that they just assume are Skrulls, you know? It's not really you can't say it's about that though, because it's introduced in the last 5 minutes of the whole thing. This show isn't about anything on any level. It also sucks that they used AI art in the opening credits. I was actually, at first when it started, I was like, oh, they have a title sequence. That's cool. These shows usually don't have that. I can't wait to see how this plays out. And as it kept going on, I was like, why does this look so fucking ugly? And then I go online, you know, a couple minutes later after the episode ends, and I'm like, oh, because it's AI, and it, you know, looks like shit. You know, they didn't pay someone properly. Remember when the strikes were first getting started and then, you know, this episode drops and it's like, oh, fuck, really? Like, a lot of the reason why they're striking is because of the fear of AI, and here you are doing an AI opening title sequence that any artist could have actually done. Fuck you. It's just a really big disappointment for a show that had an interesting story potential at first to really get down and dirty with some of the other side characters in the spy world, you know, to do something a bit more with them, do more with Maria Hill, do more with Martin Freeman, for all the other work that goes in. Like, there are some bursts of action that happen where I'm like, I'm excited about this, I'd like to see more of this. For the great score that was done, there's some pretty good music in this to accompany a lot of the sequence. There is some moments of good acting, you know. Sam Jackson does put his all into some stuff, you know, and the other actors as well, as I mentioned. And the last thing I guess I can say positively is something that they already did well in Captain Marvel, which is the Skrull effect, the practical makeup, and then that little transformation thing they do. You know, that looks good, you know, visually. It's the best looking visual effect, because there's so many other visual effects that look fucking terrible. And it can also hamper down the action sequences they do. So it's like, you have these little parts that are like, okay, this stuff is good and what you usually can expect to be fine, but this show is bad in ways that we've seen the MCU be bad at before, but they've also just, I don't know what it is. I don't want to attribute it just to laziness. Is it rushed? I don't know. I did hear from the Weekly Planet podcast, they spent like 4 months doing reshoots on this thing, and that's why the budget ballooned to $212 million. So it's not a thing of they filmed this in one go and that was the budget. It was they filmed it in one go, but the reshoots bumped it up to that number. So it's like, it doesn't even it doesn't even look as good as movies that cost around that same. Like, you know, Oppenheimer cost $100 million. Barbie cost $145 million, and those movies look fantastic. And it did not help that the Secret Invasion finale was coming out around that time, and people were like, this show cost $212 million? Are you fucking insane? This show is like the epitome of the MCU's worst mistakes and the things that they've just kind of let slide, like, oh, we don't, you know, people criticize us for it, but, you know, we don't need to do anything really about it because casual audiences and, you know, other people don't think that it's a big deal. And now it's just this big mess of, oh, nobody likes this. Look at the Rotten Tomatoes score for not just the season, but the finale in particular. It's low. And yeah, for good reason. Is this my least favorite MCU project? Absolutely it is. For anything that I have, you know, seen out of the MCU, the specials, the TV shows, the movies, I have never given one of them lower than like a C- in the MCU. I got to for this one. I'm gonna give Secret Invasion a D+. If they do come back for a season 2, I don't know how, because nobody liked this fucking thing. And I don't know what else they could do story-wise, but if they do, I hope they can improve. I hope they can find an interesting way to continue this, or maybe they'll just continue it in other movies and projects. You know, that's probably the best way to go forward. It's just so embarrassing, you know what I mean? Like, to come off of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which is the most heartfelt, the most passionate project to come out of them, because you have James Gunn at the helm. This is his story, you know, his heart is poured into these characters and those movies. And that's the ultimate conclusion of that, and it's so emotional, it's so good, it's the best thing the MCU has ever done, Volume 3. It's the best at what they can be. And then to follow it up with this, the worst. It's like, what are we doing? You know what I mean? Like, what is going on over there? And I'm not trying to be like, you know, oh, MCU ruined, blah, blah, blah. It's like, maybe they can rebound. There's always time to rebound. They can always change their plan. Even though they've announced dates, they've postponed stuff before. They can also rework stuff, you know? They might be a little embarrassed that they have to reorganize some things, but I think they might have to streamline once again. I think that was one of the smarter things that the MCU did earlier on leading up to Infinity War and Endgame, was that, you know, you could watch them all separately, you know what I mean? Like, you could watch some of the solo films independently from the other ones. You could watch even the first Avengers movie independently from the solo stuff. They catch you up and you're ready to go. And it seems like after, you know, the boom of Disney Plus and, you know, the success, you know, the high that the MCU was on in 2019 and 2018 as well, it just seemed like they felt like they could branch out and do anything, and anything would be successful. People would be hooked. And we've seen how the viewership has gone down for so many other shows. And we've seen the products as a whole, quality-wise, start to crumble, because it definitely seems like people are stretched thin over there. You know, not just visual effects artists, because they are, but, you know, Kevin Feige, I'm sure, as well. I'm sure a lot of the leadership roles over there feel stretched because they have to cover so much ground, when really what the MCU used to do really well was just streamline it. Everyone can come in, everyone can be excited for this thing, and it wasn't too often. It was like maybe 2 or 3 times a year. It wasn't like, and this isn't really a problem for this year as much because they've slowed down on the shows, but in 2021 they were like, show, movie, you know. It's slowed down a little bit, but it's still like, it's a bit much, and I feel like you're losing the plot on, do you want to build up to the next phase right away? Because there's so many like hints at like what's next, or do you want to just like chill for a bit and get us connected with the characters? Because you're not doing a fantastic job all around with either. So anyways, guys, that's my long fucking rant on Secret Invasion. What did you guys think of the show? Leave your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.